Nós começamos semana passada falando sobre a avaliação dos resultados da aprendizagem transformadora e hoje nós vamos dar início à discussão às rubricas de avaliação e ao portfólio da aprendizagem transformadora. São temas importantíssimos para nós, para o nosso projeto e para o desenvolvimento das propostas de aprendizagem transformadora. Eu agradeço vocês por terem vindo. Acho que tenho certeza que vai ser uma manhã muito proveitosa e muito rica para todos nós. A professora Raquel está aqui conosco hoje, acompanhando do MLC, do Mackenzie Language Center. E, inclusive, se alguém precisar de uma ajuda, uma tradução, né, para uma interlocução mais fácil com a professora Romano, com a Sara, que é a estudante de doutorado que está aqui conosco, né, realizando parte da sua pesquisa, a professora vai contribuir. Se bem que semana passada foi tranquilo, né? Deu para a gente desenvolver. A Alessandra também falou devagarzinho, isso ajudou bastante. Então, eu agradeço muito, muito a presença de vocês. Thank you very much, Alessandra, for being here and for this workshop. I'm pretty sure it will be terrific, and you have a lot to share with us. And this is a unique opportunity for all of us. Thank you very much. Obrigada e vamos em frente.
Muito obrigada por sua apresentação, something of that kind. And I apologize for use English. I know that you prefer a consistency of language, but for maybe sometimes I can stop and you can help with the translation in Portuguese in case it will be needed. So it's a real pleasure for me and Sarah to stay here with you today. And so as anticipated by Professor Brunstein, we will deepen the topic of the qualitative tools for the evaluation of reflective outcomes. So just to mention, is there here anyone who was not attending last Friday? Maybe one person, maybe, but no, okay. So everyone knows what we discussed on Friday. We presented several tools based on a quantitative assessment of reflective outcomes. We tried to see if we can use some of the items, some of the questions of the quantitative tools to integrate in our reflective essays, so in what we ask to students to fill out. And now today we are going to see 3 different examples of qualitative tools. Like one is a very, very easy to manage form. The second one is an example of integrating knowledge for e-portfolio. And the third one is the instrument of rubric. I had the opportunity to read all of your comments. They were very nice. And so, yeah, terrific. So thank you for your comments, anonymous comments that we collected in the end of the workshop. And the suggestions for this workshop were to be consistent in terms of language, to have much more group discussions and hands-on practices, and also to have more evidence-based practices. So we tried to model today's workshop in terms of meeting your suggestions and expectations. And so I just want to start with you with this quote. It's a Confucian quote that maybe you can already know. It's nice. What I hear, I forget. What I see, I remember. What I do, I understand. Just to underline the importance of hands-on activities. A funny check-in to start, okay? During the last workshop, we started with introduce ourselves and tell something funny about us. Today, I want to start with a funny check-in in which I would like to ask you to invite you to raise your hands if the content of this statement apply with your experience. First, you give a long narrative description of the assignment in the syllabus, but the students continually ask 2 to 3 questions per class about your expectations. These apply to me and to my experience. Maybe just mine? Okay, thank you. Oh, yeah, thank you. These apply very often, actually, with me and my, yeah. You give a carefully, oh, welcome. It's a real pleasure to see you here. We just started, okay? So you give a carefully planned assignment that you never used before, and to your surprise, it takes the whole class period to explain to your students. Every time. This is exactly every time. You have worked very hard to explain the complex end-of-term paper. I know that, especially for some schools and some subjects, the assignment is based on a test and reflective paper that students are asked to fill out or to realize during the semester and at the end of the semester. Yet students are starting to regard you as an enemy, out to trick them with the incomprehensible assignment. This applies to me and to my experience. So thank you for your participation. If all these statements apply to your experience, we are in the right place. Thank you for this very, very funny check-in. And so let's go a little bit in depth with this topic of having a more qualitative approach to the assessment, especially if we want to prove the reflective outcomes that our students can gather and can gain from our experience in the classroom. So we recognize that it's very widespread in academia, the psychometric approach to the assessment and to the evaluation. We used to have, psychoattitudinal test. We used to have multiple choices test in the end of a semester, and you are just starting the new semester this week, right? Yeah. And so we also see about this the last survey and the Tropos as 2 possible quantitative-based tools to implement or to simplify, to use but in a very simple way as a part of our test of our reflective essay during the semester and at the end of the semester. Today we will see some kind of rubric, and we will see a very easy reflective practice and the e-portfolio that are much more edumetric, are much more coherent, aligned with an edumetric approach to the evaluation. What can means an edumetric approach to the evaluation? Edumetric. So you don't need just to measure, you need to measure in order to collect feedback for your practices and for your teaching, and also to understand what is the educational process of learning of the students. And so we would like to ask you to do a very simple activity. Please, Sara.
Thank you, Professoressa Alessandra. I have 2 kinds of post-it, one green and one yellow, just to underline 2 different positions, the pros and the contras that you think an edumetric assessment is in your opinion. So I'll pass between you. You can write. If you need a pen, I'll give you a pen. And after 1-2 minutes, and according to you, you can stand up and put this post-it on this white paper, and so let's read together your answers. Thank you.
So really, according to you, you need you can write in Portuguese. You have just to tell what can be the pros and what can be the contras of integrating feedback, qualitative aspects of assessment in your class, in your courses, in your semesters. And you can say, for example, as a possible suggestions, controls. I remember that we spoke with a colleague from the engineering school that sometimes it's not easy to practice reflective inputs with engineering students because they follow a very binary thinking, a very logic-based thinking. And so this can be a contrast, like I cannot use this easily with my students because of their binary way of thinking. Or one of the pros can be, I can integrate these reflective inputs with my students, like Joan, like Joanna, because we used to have academic discussions, academic debate in which they needed to assume one perspective or another, with which they can disagree, but the importance is the perspective-taking process. So just think about one pros and one contras for each, for the idea of integrating reflective outcomes assessment in your courses, in your class. And as I have mentioned to you, you can use Portuguese. You can also say, it's difficult for me, it's overwhelming. That's fine. We are here to analyze together pros and contras. And we discovered the papeleria of the campus to buy the different... we discovered also the merchandising side of the papeleria. Yeah. So it was a learning experience also for us.
Gente, vocês precisam de algum esclarecimento maior? Ficou claro? O que vocês acharam? Ela pediu para colocar os prós e os contras de pedir, de ter esse feedback, reflexivo sobre essa avaliação, esse endométrico, né, esse feedback, essa avaliação, né? Então, aí esses dois exemplos que ela deu, de se eu fizer essa avaliação, uma vantagem seria estimular os alunos a fazerem a terem esse pensamento crítico. Por outro lado, num aluno de engenharia, é difícil, e daí ela colocou como um contra. Mas, na verdade, é mais um difícil porque eles têm um pensamento mais binário, então é mais difícil fazer uma avaliação crítica. Então, eu interpretei, ficou talvez um pouco mais assim, interpretativo. Não sei se é um pró e um contra, mas assim, talvez mais uma facilidade e uma dificuldade. O que você acha para você que seria um contra na sua matéria e um a favor para a sua matéria, ou mais uma facilidade e uma dificuldade? E aí talvez eu possa passar para ela talvez pedir mais algum exemplo, se for o caso, ou is this more like what would be easier for you and more difficult, or really what you think it's a pro for your both. Talvez possa ser também um exemplo como que é difícil para você colocar essa avaliação. I'm sorry. Como que seria difícil, né, na sua matéria, porque daí seria diferente numa perspectiva. Você quer interpretar na perspectiva de uma engenharia, na humanidades,
Please.
né?
You can, yes, if you have done, you can put it on the whiteboard.
May I ask you anything?
we were discussing about it, that we are now starting from kindergarten because we understood that at the university it's too late. So we have, yeah. They are really implementing a rubric for the evaluation in primary schools. So we start with a very easy reflective exercise in the kindergarten, and in primary schools the system of evaluation changed and now it's based on a rubric. The teachers are trained. The teachers receive a specific training of at least 25 hours per year about how to implement a rubric evaluation system from the primary school, because it is a huge change of perspectives. And so it's mandatory, this training about the use of rubric from primary schools. But we were discussing about this just coming here, and we say that university is going to be later respect to the primary schools. Yeah. It's a political choice imposed by the European Union. Remember always that we are part of the European Union, and so we needed to adjust and adapt to a lot of indications from the European Union. And so the European Union asked to implement the rubric system of evaluation for primary school. Yeah. So here we are. Oh, Raquel, go there.
Let's wait another second.
Não separou por cores?
Thank you for your help. Thank you both for your help. Muito obrigada. Para você, ajudo?
De nada. Disponha. Some of your students didn't respect the colors. We have to review the colors, Professoressa Romano. Yellow and green. What can we do with them?
So, everybody has no? Okay.
Maybe we can start reading. It's very nice if we can start reading and let the other people another couple of minutes to finish.
Help me with the Portuguese one.
Yeah.
Yes, of course.
Prose. Rubric tool, prose. Student gains autonomy. There is a pros and controls in the same. Controls have to calculate student average. So this can be in the middle. Yes, yes.
Great, in the middle.
Great.
It's not yellow and green. We can have also some mixing colors. Yeah.
This is for you.
Okay, pros. To be clear in
Sì, scusa.
To be clear, in the rubrics, they're going to be evaluated, and I think this is a cons. Yes. Let's read separated, right? Or can we read all together if they're together? Yes, cons?
Sure.
Okay. Okay, we can change the engessamento, John. Their stank. Yeah, their stank in the evaluation. Okay, you can change. Okay, they're all the same in the evaluation. Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot the word. Okay. The students learn to reflect, to think, and stimulating the critical thought approach, of course. Yeah.
You can personalize the changes based on the the main topics mentioned by the students.
Yes.
And another one, more assertive and practice classes. It's an open question. You always can be surprised with the answer.
Yeah.
Students can perceive their role in the process of learning and evaluation.
Stimulate the protagonism of a student in the construction of knowledge. They can do connections to their previous experiences. Structure evaluation of disciplines with different staff or professors helping students.
Deep discussion, dialogue, interaction, construction, arguments, being more objective, helps students to have more clarity and control over the process of learning.
Great. Great. That's a good point.
The last one, students like clear feedbacks.
Exactly. What about the contrast? Can you read the 3-4 contrasts?
Yes.
Also
Sure.
the Portuguese is fine.
Okay. So, edumetric tools are the contrast laws of formative character. Distraction, too much time, difficult to learn classes.
Exactly.
It's difficult to implement qualitative feedbacks.
It's difficult to assess when the student has really been transformed, or if he's only replicating a speech.
That's good. Yeah. Okay. So I would like to thank you for your participation and also for pointing out sincerely what are the pros and the cons of implementing feedback and reflective tasks in our courses. We will try to face the contrasts that were indicated by your answers in the pros and the cons. So we are going to face some of the weaknesses that we found in the contrasts, because we all agree about the utility of reflective practices and the utility of reflective assessment tools that we underlined in the pros. The first one, reflective practice, it's a qualitative, it's super simple. Super simple. You can add in the task for your reflective essay a very easy to manage reflective prompt. Okay, it's called reflective prompt, and it is like, I used to think, now I think. Just a very super simple prompt that you can use verbally, speaking, when you are in the class with your students, or you can use in your reflective essays. Please, Sarah, can you distribute the handout? I found also the Portuguese version of this reflective prompt. So I put in the handout that you can bring with you the printed version of both the languages, English and Portuguese. And you find it in the second and the third page of this handout. So it's super simple, and you can, I hope that it's Portuguese in the third page. Can you please confirm me? Is it Portuguese? Oh, it's a Portugnol. Is it a Portuguese? Great. Yeah. Okay. Because there was also the Spanish version, but I think I printed out. And so you can see that it's a second and third page. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. First page in English and second page in Portuguese. We print out both the two versions. And if you can see, it's a super simple, super. In this case, I had the opportunity during this weekend to speak a lot with the Professora Jeanette and also with an Italian colleague from the law school, Professora Francesca Columba. And she explained it to me that while for us the traditional way to examine students is oral, an oral interview of 15 to 20 minutes, both of them explained to me that here it's much more common the reflective essays, a kind of a writing assignment and test. So you can integrate, for example, in your writing assignment, this reflective prompt in order to collect the first very simple evidence of your students' change. They can just say, I used to think, now I think, about a question, about a problem, or about the content of your classes. Another example, the e-portfolio. I knew that you worked on e-portfolio and rubric during the 5th Transformative Learning Forum, and maybe also during the 2nd Transformative Learning Forum. Professora Suelene explained this to me quite well. I just want to give you an example of how I use the e-portfolio as a structured form of reflective essays with my students for their evaluation. So I developed this multi-methods assessment. You can see that it is declared in the syllabus of the course, and so the 60% of their total score is the e-portfolio. So I graded and I weighted the role, the importance of the e-portfolio for them. Then I implement project work with the peer assessment rubric, and then I put the refer to the learning activity survey and to the evaluation form in which I collect feedback from my students. And so, how I developed the e-portfolio. If you scan this QR code, you, with your mobile phone or with your laptop, you can have access to a folder, a Google folder, in which you find an example of the e-portfolio, one book, an entire book, with the topic of grading and assessment in higher education, and a couple of articles that you might want to read. Why it's important? Because in the total book, can you confirm me that you have access? Oh, can you check from my email that I can give them the access, please? I apologize, we tried this, but sometimes maybe it's coming, the request of access, and if you can allow them, it will be much appreciated. Thank you. Because we put in this Google folder a book that contains 15 examples of rubric for 15 different subjects. So it's very easy, and I put this resource for you because you can say, I come from law, or I come from engineering, or I come from science, or I come from biology, and you can find examples of rubric per each subject. So that's the reason why we put the whole book. And it's a useful resources that you can read sometimes in your life, okay? So here in that folder, you find also the example of the e-portfolio I developed, in which the e-portfolio is in Italian, I apologize, but there are some words in English and you can easily translate it with deep learning. Do you know deep learning? Our students know deep learning better than deep translator better than us. And so what you find in this e-portfolio is a demographic sections with information about students' prior experiences, their professional background, if they have done some other work experiences before coming to university. Then they have takeaways per each lesson, and takeaways are the kind of integration of knowledge that I try to ask them to do. I invite them with the section about the takeaways to tell what is your takeaway from this class. What are the insights from this class? What is how can you relate the concept that you learn in this class with the concept that you learn in other classes? And then there's a section about reflection on experience, which is a guided it's a kind of a guided meta reflection on the experience. And finally, there is the identification of which is the usefulness of what they learn during the class according to their professional outcomes, their professional growth. The part about the reflection on institutional learning outcomes. So it looks like complicated, it's really easy. And actually, did you give them the access? Is it now working? Let's try, let's make a try, because it's very important if they can have access to the Google folder. Got it? Yes. Got it? Oh, thank you. Let's try to ask for permission, and yeah, we received the notifications, and yeah, perfect. Yes. Thank you. Okay, so I think that now, Raquel, do you want to tell this in Portuguese that they needed to ask for the acceptance, and we can give immediately the acceptance?
Vocês já pediram? Clica e pede a permissão. Eu consegui também. Pede, ela vai receber um e-mail. Aí você faz, só que daí depois você entra novamente, tá?
In any case, I can send to the SEAT and the Professora Suelene the zip folder, and she can forward.
Qualquer coisa ela manda para a Suelene, que pode mandar para vocês zipados, arquivos, mas... Yes, Sarah.
Yeah. Okay. 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 Perfect. Perfect. So it's very important to have access during the resources. We know that because it's something. So you have access to the handout and to the Google folder that we create for you. And so you can tell me, maybe, is this a e-portfolio that you create for your class? The example that I put in the Google folder is management, educational management services course. It's a course in which you learn how to manage, how to be coordinator of educational services. It's between management and education. It's a cross-disciplinary course. And so if I ask the total students, as you may see, were 182. If I ask my students to fill out the e-portfolio and the learning activity survey, what can I observe? Did I observe with that class? Because this was much more important. I remember that Bartholomew, the colleague from psychology, said, what are the evidence of the learning outcomes of your students? And so this is an example of what kind of evidence I can collect from a case study during the class. You can see that the class was very huge, 182 people, a nightmare, that were contemporary in the same moment, okay? So I modeled for them reflective practices in class. I asked them to fill out the e-portfolio as their reflective assignment. And the evaluation for the e-portfolio was graded and weighted the 60% of their total examination for the whole semester. And then I asked them to fill out the learning activity survey, which was useful to understand what kind of reflective experiences were particularly fruitful for them. They say that the most important experiences were personal reflection, deep thought, and the e-portfolio, and for sure the innovative course structure. They say the most important, the most transformative, potentially transformative factors of this class were the innovative way this class was performed and organized. And here you can see how the graphic of the responses changed according to the kind of the answers of the students. I don't want to bore you. I just want to show you how can we collect data from our classes. This was an initial effort because I spent time to design the class. But once I choose to use the e-portfolio and the learning activity survey, it's done. Then it's a part of the process to analyze eventually the data. I use a Google form. The Google form automatically produced the Excel sheet. So it was very easy to have this graphic. Nothing really complicated, I should tell the truth, okay? And so I can have a picture of my class, understanding what was meaningful for them and what not. You have an example of this kind with your institutional e-portfolio, with the Mackenzie portfolio, because the problem is that I'm doing this all by myself in my classes. I'm creating the e-portfolio for my class, for my 4 courses per semester. And I am implementing the e-portfolio, I'm implementing the system of assessment and evaluation, but it's just me as voluntary professor. You have something more. You have an institutional support with the e-portfolio of the Mackenzie, which is incredibly useful to create the stories of learning of your students. And so it's something that finally the students can put all the curricular and co-curricular activities in. It's very important because they do this just for my classes. Here you have the opportunity to have the whole process and the whole experiences of learning, curricular and co-curricular, formal and informal. So let's go a little bit with the third instrument, and then we can have a short break if you want, if you need. Yeah, especially because of the English language. We can have the rubric. We can try to see together what kind of a rubric we can adopt in our courses as a qualitative assessment of reflective outcomes. If you see, I'm much more talking about reflective outcomes today because it's very difficult to collect evidence of transformative outcomes, especially after just one course. Maybe what is much more realistic is to have evidence of reflective insight from our students, communication improvement, which is still important, the communication skills, the capacity and the ability to communicate their thinking and to prove evidence, to prove argumentations for their position, and the critical thinking capacity. The basic dimension, no, I don't want to bore you because I know that you are familiar with the rubric. So basic dimensions of rubric is that one. It's a really, really super basic dimensions of rubric. You need a task or at least a dimension of skills that you want to ask students to develop, and you have to understand what are the dimensions of the achievement that you want to invite students to gain, to gather, to achieve, and you need to have a scaling from 1 to 3, or I don't know, yes or not, in the super easy form of the rubric. So it's not complicated. You know what might be much more complicated? To clarify to ourselves what are the dimensions that we want to develop with the students. This can be really challenging. It's not challenging creating the rubric, because the rubric is basically a matrix of learning with some scaling and some dimensions and potentially descriptors of each dimension. The challenge is to identify what are the dimensions that can prove that that capacity, that ability has been developed. An example of the scaling that you can use are this one: exemplary, proficient, marginal, advanced, intermediate, novice, accomplished, average, beginning. Those are non-judgmental scaling that you can use in order to evaluate your students' progress, identify the level in which they are, and give them back some feedback about how to move from one level to another. It looks like really complicated. I told you it's not complicated to create the rubric. The challenge is to understand what are the dimensions of the rubric. Very, very easy examples of rubric for critical thinking and for reflective outcomes that I want to share with you. I know that you already are familiar with a different type of rubric: holistic, analytic, and developmental. So I will just focus on rubric for reflective outcomes. The holistic is the easiest one. In this case, you have just one dimension per time, and you consider the whole process of learning. It's much more similar to a checklist, because you can say if a student has achieved or not, whether a student has achieved the progress about that dimension of learning. Here, in this example of a holistic rubric, you can see that there are some indicators, some descriptors for the reflective outcomes of students, such as how much he's able to express clearly his ideas, communication skills, and reflective skills. We are losing the post-it. Resist. We trust you. So, how much he can give consideration to different and alternative points of view, and so on. So those are very, very easy way to say whether a student has achieved that learning outcome or not. Pros and cons of the holistic rubric. Easy to do. Low complexity, but very vague. Very vague in the kind of feedback that we can give to students. Analytic rubric, much more complex. They are called also from 3 to 5 level rubric, because in this case, the level, as you can see, is not just descriptive, but there's a scaling. Okay, and this is an example of a famous reflective outcomes rubric. In this case, this is also included in your handout and in the Google folder. In this case, in this reflective rubric, what we can say, what is really interesting for us, it's not the adoption of the whole rubric, because maybe it's a little bit too challenging, too demanding, but to find inspirations about the descriptors of the evidence of some introspective thinking, reflective thinking, critical reflective thinking that our students can achieve. So what is interesting in this example of a rubric that I show you, I selected for you, is that in this case, you can see, just for example, the analysis and meaning making, the difference between the level, the initial level of the student and the top level of critical reflection that we can see in the students, in which he is able to carry out comprehensive analysis, creating connections, meaning making, and so on. You say it's really complicated. Maybe. And that's the reason why we needed to simplify. But if we want to collect evidence with a rubric of the reflective outcomes of our students, the rubric can be a useful tool, and maybe we can use a simplified version of this rubric. Last one. Maybe this is like the commonest rubric for reflective outcomes. It's based on Camber's theory of reflective outcomes, and it's an analytic rubric with a percentage. So it's an analytic rubric which is weighted. In this case, you can see that we have just 3 dimensions: evidence of development, connection to the academic curricular concept, and reflection on existing knowledge. And it's important that you have the descriptors for each dimension. These 3 dimensions is very easy, and you have the descriptors for each dimension in order to grade the students from the automatic superficial responses that we were telling sometimes the students just to repeat what they think and what they think we expect to hear, up to the idea of having very critical reflective learners. So this is also in your handout. It can be like the easiest one to use in order to grade the students. You can use this also for analyze and giving us the evaluation for the reflective essays. So you can use this in a way that is based on observations, or you can use this rubric as a matrix for the analysis of your students' reflective essays. I think that maybe we can have a short break. What is your thought? Is it fine for you? Yeah, okay. I don't want it to be too boring, so tell me if it's fine for you to have the break here, or if you want to go over for another 10 minutes and then have the short break. Let's vote. What time is? 10:30? Okay, we can have the stop now. We can have the stop now. It's fine. Have a 10 minutes break. It's fine. Was exactly, the time.